From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Ollie Barrett there. Thanks very much, Ollie. Thursday's programme. You well? Did you have a good day? Another nice day here in the south of Manchester. Although it took a while to get going, you know. But this afternoon it's been lovely. Yes, I've got two terrific guests lined up for you this Thursday, March 21st. So let's get on with it then.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Now, this hour, Anna Brees joins the programme. She's a really interesting woman, Anna. She's got her own media company called Brees Media. You can find it at breesmedia.com. Former ITV and BBC journalist. Anna is very interested in what's happened to the BBC. Okay, we're going to be talking about the flagship Panorama programme and why there are very serious questions to be asked of the producers of that programme about bias, about propaganda and about staged events. We'll talk about the media in general. Anna Brees, I think you'll enjoy meeting Anna. And in the second hour, we're off to Montana because Dr. Michael P. Masters is there. He's a professor of biological anthropology at Montana Tech in Butte, Montana. And he's written a book called Identifying Flying Objects, which looks very closely at whether extraterrestrials may be a distant future version of ourselves. Fascinating man, fascinating book. We'll get into that in the second hour. We are live on the usual channels, of course, Fab Radio in Manchester, the greatest city in the world. There's no doubt about it. Manchester, right across the UK and Europe on multiple platforms as well. Triggerwarning.tv and richieallen.co.uk. Oh yeah, the joys of spring. Everybody is a bit lighter of foot and a bit smilier. Anybody who has a dog will know this to be true. Dog walkers, God love us, at least the ones who walk their dogs, because as we remember from a few weeks ago, huge survey done in this country found that less than half of dogs are actually brought outside for a walk. I'm not going to go all Ricky Gervais on you, but that really pisses me off. It really does. But the ones who do get out in all weathers know that once you get into late March, people are a little bit more cheerful and a little bit more likely to say, how ya? And stop and have a conversation. I'm like that all year around. Why? Because, well, I'm perfect. I'm a wonderful man. I am in my arse. If you believe that, I'll tell you another one. So BBC and impartiality, propaganda, the lack of ethical journalism with Anna Brees real soon. Just a quick one on impartiality. The BBC website, or the news version of it anyway, which is bbc.co.uk/news, has a live running commentary with updates every minute or every 2 minutes. So if you go to BBC News, you'll see this. And it's read and watched by a lot of people. It's a very popular page. And it's incredibly biased in what it chooses to post there. And it's not just me. That's not my subjective opinion. It really is. I'm going to give you a quick example. At 3:30 today, I was in the studio here and I was putting together a few things to talk about. And I went on to that particular bbc.co.uk/news and the live Brexit update page, which is a hugely popular page. And I'm going to give you a series of posts in order, so I'm not selectively choosing them to make my point, because I wouldn't do that. That would be a cheap thing to do. So these are the posts posted to the BBC News website on the live Brexit update segment, which is just constantly updating itself, right? First one at 3:30 now, not now because it's obviously changed since then. Who's signing the petition to stop Brexit? Well, Hugh Grant is, and Brian Cox is the first man to play Hannibal Lecter. Do you remember him? Brian Cox, he's done a lot more, of course, as well. And the BBC have put a map on to show the parts of the UK where people are signing a petition to revoke Article 50 and keep us in the European Union. It's got 1,100,000 signatures so far, and it's apparently crashed that website. Next post was Soubry attacks May's statement. This is referring to Theresa May's address to the public last night, to the British public. That's a very negative anti-kind of Theresa May story. I don't have any sympathy for May now, but I'm making my point. The next story was Umuna, that's Chuka Umuna, government right to bring together opposition parties. The next post was Macron, any extension should be as short as possible. The next post was petition to stop Brexit passes 1 million. The next post was the TUC, the Trades Union Congress, and the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, have urged Theresa May to change her approach to Brexit, warning the shock of no deal would be felt for generations. The next post was Home Secretary Sajid Javid goes to Essex to get away from Brexit. I don't know if it's Joey Essex, if he's gone to see Joey Essex for a few beers, or if he's gone to Essex. The next one was Bercow defends Parliament, Speaker of the House John Bercow. So the BBC is institutionally biased. That was over about 45 minutes of updates and flashes. And at that time, there were many Brexiteers posting Twitter messages or tweets and Instagram posts, and the BBC person could easily have could have put some of those postings on there as well for a bit of balance, but they didn't. This is what's going on. We'll deal with this in greater detail with Anna Brees shortly. So Theresa May addressed the nation last night, telling the British public that she's on our side. Go on, Theresa, good girl. And she hopes to force her deal through Parliament next week for the third vote. It'll be the third vote. It was voted down twice. She laid the blame for everything at the door of Parliament. Of this, I am sure, she said, the public have had enough. You're tired of the infighting. You're tired of the games and the arcane procedural rows. She went on to blame MPs again. Tired of MPs talking about nothing else but Brexit when you have concerns about schools, knife crime to health service and so on. I'm on your side, she said. It's now time for MPs to decide. Now, after that speech, a number of MPs screamed bloody murder, blue murder, murder she wrote, murder most foul. MPs said that Theresa May's statement was dangerous because it now means that we risk being attacked in the street. So here's the Speaker of the House, John Bercow, today addressing this and giving the assembled MPs at Parliament a collective pat on the back, a kick in the arse and a lollipop. This is Bercow saying, well, you're all lovely people, really.
None of you is a traitor. All of you are doing your best. This should not be, and I'm sure will not prove, to be a matter of any controversy whatsoever. From the chair, let me say that I believe passionately in the institution of Parliament, in the rights of members of this House, and in their commitment to their duty. And I use the word duty in the singular advisedly. The sole duty of every member of Parliament is to do what he or she thinks is right. There is nothing, in my judgment, to be added.
Yeah. They're all happy with that, of course, but surely it's the sole duty of elected members to do that which their constituents have instructed them to do. That's what I'd have thought anyway. Many of these MPs, in fact the majority of Remainer MPs, particularly in the Labour Party, come from constituencies that voted to leave in no uncertain terms. So it isn't their duty to do whatever they think is right. It's their duty to basically carry out the wishes of the people and to implement the result of the referendum. So MPs are running for their lives, are they, in fear because of what Theresa May said? Have a listen to Labour MP Paul Williams. Paul was on Sky News today and he talks about one of his female colleagues, but he declines to mention her or name her or give us any indication as to who she is. Labour MP Paul Williams.
I spent last Thursday evening with a Member of Parliament. We were about to go into the voting lobby, ready to vote against a no deal, taking a no deal off the table. And this MP desperately knew it was the right thing for her constituents. But she has been the subject of so much abuse. She told me she had received 500 threats in the previous week, including death threats.
Did she count them? 500 threats. Who counts them? How would you get anything done? Where would you find the time? Sitting around counting threats. Are we supposed to believe that? But anyway.
She was in tears. She was literally trembling at the idea of going in to vote for something that she knew was right because of the atmosphere of intimidation which Theresa May is adding to.
I'm guessing the female politician who voted to take no deal off the table was worried because her constituency voted in favour of leaving the European Union. He says she was trembling with fear. Nobody should tremble in fear. Nobody. Nobody should be threatened. Nobody should have to listen to vitriolic language and name-calling. Of course, I certainly wouldn't support that. But politicians should live in fear of losing their seat or being deselected by their local parliamentary party when they don't carry out the wishes of their constituents. She was going to vote against the people who elected her, and she was crying and trembling, saying, "Oh, it's terrible, and I'm receiving death threats." Suck it up, Sheila, I would say.
Now, later on that evening, I was with her when she was actually talking to the Prime Minister.
Sounds like he's stalking this female politician, by the way. I was with her in the afternoon, and later on I was with her, and then I met her with the Prime Minister. Leave her alone, you bunny boiler, you.
Prime Minister explaining the sheer fear that she has in her life at the moment because of this environment, this pressure that's being heaped on MPs. Nobody minds constituents lobbying, trying to persuade, but these are explicit threats. And I saw Theresa May being very kind to her. She put her arm around her, she comforted her, she listened to her, and then she went and delivered a speech that she knows is upping the ante, is trying to pitch people against politicians. It's not right.
It's not right. Paul Williams there, Labour. First time I've ever heard him speak, actually, Paul Williams. He's not a very active member of Westminster. You don't see him very often. On the theme of MPs being blamed by May, here's a bit of a conspiracy theory for you, my friend. Sky's incoming political editor, Beth Rigby. Now, you know I have a soft spot for Beth. She's been described by this presenter as a bit of a hack, which is not... Well, it's not a... What's the word I'm looking for here? It's not a derogatory term. Hack, if you look it up. She's been around a long time, Beth Rigby. She's about to be named, or has been named, Sky News future political editor. What's his name? Faisal Islam is going to the BBC to run the economics department. He's going to be the BBC's economics editor. Yes, that's right. So she's going to be the Sky political editor. And she's picked up on something. Why, if Theresa May wants MPs to vote for her deal next week for the third time, why would she be alienating them in this way? This is a good question posed by Beth Rigby.
But I have to tell you that after last night's statement, the Prime Minister has not won over at all the people that she would want to. Lisa Nandy, a key Labour leaver. She needs a good couple of dozen of those Labour Leave MPs to back her, or Labour MPs representing Leave constituency, should I say. She needs them to vote with her. Lisa Nandy last night, after May's statement, tweeting out that she was pitting Parliament against the people, that it was dangerous and reckless, and that the Prime Minister was attacking the support, those that she needs the support from, and she said it would cost her. The reality of it is that unless Theresa May calls an election next week, it won't be the public that's going to decide on what happens next. It will be MPs. And as I said, after last night's performance, it seems that she has sort of signed the death note on Meaningful Vote 3, with a lot of MPs just simply furious with her, saying that she is stoking division at a time when she needs to find the art of compromise and play the politics of persuasion. So lots of unhappiness here over her and how she's handled this.
Yeah, and she isn't stupid, Theresa May. So you've got to, the question begs to be asked, is it deliberate? Is it deliberate? Is it, saying is it deliberate, it's probably a bit silly. She doesn't need to go that far to ensure that her deal is voted down again. It's going to be voted down again anyway. But you've got to wonder what's going on there. The UK is due to leave the European Union a week today. No, a week tomorrow, in fact. Yeah, the 29th of March, isn't it? Yeah, a week tomorrow. We're due to be out. We're not going to be out now. As you know, Theresa May is in Brussels. She's meeting with Tusk and Juncker and all the rest of them. And she's asking for an extension till the end of June. It's been suggested that the European Union, well, we heard from Donald Tusk yesterday, the EU president. He said they would grant that extension, the proviso being that May got her deal through next week, but she's not going to get it through. So what I think will happen then is they'll say, right, we'll give you the extension, get the deal through. The deal will be put before MPs next Tuesday or Wednesday. There won't be any significant changes to it that might entice MPs to vote for it, and it'll be voted down again. And I think at that stage, May will then probably have to ask for a much longer extension and will possibly fall on her sword then and resign as Prime Minister of the UK. Now, I'm always wrong, so don't go anywhere near a bookie with that tidbit of information from me. But look, whatever way it plays out, the United Kingdom won't be leaving the European Union. Millions of people expected to join in with this petition that was launched, was it yesterday or overnight, was it? It's crashed the website. Over 1 million people, 1,100,000 now, demanding that Article 50 is basically stopped, or the process of leaving is stopped, and that we stay in the European Union. All manner of celebrities coming out to support that. There you are. Look, loads of other stuff to talk about as well. Assisted dying is back in the news. I wanted to talk about that, but there'll be plenty of time on Sunday and all next week to talk about that. Parents are being hit by record fines for taking their children out of school for a couple of days here and there. This isn't good. And another big story today that's getting a lot of coverage is the story of mosques in Birmingham being attacked overnight. 5 mosques were attacked overnight with people using sledgehammers and stuff. Again, it's all over the news today. They're talking about putting permanent security around mosques in this country and charging the taxpayer for it, basically. These are very strange times. And again, I think that one is going to run and run and run and run. And I'm sure you and I will talk about it as the days and weeks go on. It's 21 and a half minutes past 5. It is Thursday, the 21st of March. I am Richie Allen. Love the fact that the sun is out and spring is here. I don't know how long it'll last. It mightn't be that long. But it's here and we're going to enjoy it. And when it's here, you are inclined to play absolutely ridiculous music like this. Songs that take you back to when you went to Benalmadena in 1982 with your parents all those years ago. 1982 on the Costa del Sol. Oh yeah. This is your Richie Allen Show, Fab Radio 2, triggerwarning.tv, richieallen.co.uk, TuneIn Radio, Europe's most listened to independent radio show. 25 minutes past the hour, Madonna on the Richie Allen Show. I know it'll never happen again, I promise you. It's the weather what done it. It's the weather what done it. We're not used to that sort of weather in South Manchester. Of course we're not. Now to serious matters. I've been a reporter, a producer and a presenter at national and commercial media for years, and I never thought I'd see the day when there would be such a lack of trust and a lack of faith in mainstream media, but most of all in the BBC. Anybody who's ever worked in a newsroom whether it's in community radio or commercial radio or anywhere else, will have been told for years about the standards at the BBC, and every reporter, every producer should aspire to the standards, the ethical standards, the fairness and the balance at the BBC for years and years and years. Things have changed dramatically, I would say, in the last 15, 16 years. The Iraq War, of course, the Savile revelations, but most recently the BBC's reporting of Syria and chemical attacks there. Not once but twice, the Panorama programme and the BBC News and World Service reporting on chemical attacks and other events in Syria. And we later found out, due to the courage of BBC presenters and producers, former producers and journalists, coming out and saying, no, there's something very wrong with that reporting. So I want to introduce you to a lady who knows all about this. She's a former BBC and ITV journalist. She's got a company called Brees Media, which you can find at breesmedia.com. And she trains students there to produce professional output and content, and to make it fair, ethical and balanced. It's a really interesting thing, is that. So let's welcome her to the programme. Great to have her on. Anna Brees, lovely to be with you. How are you?
Hello, thank you for asking me on. Great.
Well,
I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks for being so kind. You were supposed to be with me yesterday, and I made a rookie mistake. I put it in the old diary for next week, and you're very good, Anna. But then I suppose you've been there yourself at one time or another. So listen, about that. I mean, when you're younger than I am, and I presume your path to journalism was similar to mine, academically, or getting an apprenticeship at a station or at a newspaper. There was a time, wasn't there, when you would have looked to the BBC and your older colleagues. I mean, I remember my older colleagues saying, you look to the BBC, and in Ireland, I suppose, to a lesser extent, RTE, for the way that it should be done. Did you ever think we'd get to this point now, when there was such a lack of faith and trust in the institution?
Well, I just remember how proud I was when I got a job at the BBC. I mean, I'd been at ITV for 7 years, but I remember I went for a presenter's job at BBC South Today in Southampton, and I beat sort of 200 people, and I know some of the people that I beat for the job ended up at ITN, and I just was so proud to work for the BBC. And I think there is really the last month, I've been feeling a lot more queasy about the BBC and my trust in the BBC, particularly BBC Panorama, in relation to meeting Robert Stewart, who's you may or may not know about, who spent the last 5.5 years investigating the 2013 documentary Saving Syria's Children, and also I watched the footage of John Sweeney. When he, you've probably seen it. Have you the documentary that Tommy Robinson's produced?
I have,
I can't even mention it because you're not even allowed to mention Tommy Robinson. I'm no fan of his at all, but I'm of course I'm going to watch the undercover footage and what happened with Panorama, and it's just become more blatantly obvious. So I probably would have worked for the BBC possibly 5 years ago. But now, I mean, I've publicly gone on Twitter and said I'm ashamed to have ever worked for them, and I would never work for them again.
Fair play to you.
Ever.
Fair play to you for making the point about Tommy Robinson, because I've been reading you quite a bit over the last few days on Twitter. You can follow Anna on Twitter, folks. There is only one Anna Brees. That's BREES. Follow Anna on Twitter. This is a lady who's worked for ITV and the BBC, a very serious journalist, a credible journalist, talking about these issues. It's a great point you make. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks of Tommy Robinson. It's irrelevant. The fact is that Panorama has attempted to stitch this guy up, and even if this guy is some of the things that he's claimed to be, they should not decide that when they come to commission that programme. They should be going to meet him with a completely open mind and absolute objectivity. Give us a flavour, because some of our listeners might not know. What has Panorama been doing that concerns you around Tommy Robinson?
Well, I mean, there's around Tommy Robinson in particular. I know he had a big, was it the 23rd of February in Manchester? There was a big demonstration, and he had this documentary. And he obviously had a couple of journalists. He'd fallen out with this girl, and she was. I think they were expecting her to give the dirt on him, but she was offered money to say that she'd fallen out with him for a front page article, and it was called Tommy Takedown. And I think Tommy Robinson had become too powerful. He does a live broadcast on Facebook and YouTube. He was getting 400,000 views within 24 hours. And I think the MI5 or Secret Services were incredibly concerned, and they know that they can rely on organisations like BBC Panorama to do their bit and to... And unfortunately now we've got mobile phones that can record people when you don't know they're being recorded. And that's something reporters and journalists need to be very careful about now. So the undercover footage of John Sweeney, of him getting drunk with this girl and trying to get her to dish some dirt on Tommy Robinson, is it's something that I think every citizen of the country needs to watch.
It's rubbish, isn't it, Anna?
Take a look at Robert Stewart as well in the investigations he's done into saving Syria's children, which is just as honestly, it's mind-blowing.
I'll tell you what, Anna, because we're going to talk extensively, I hope anyway, for the next 20-25 minutes about Syria specifically, because this is huge and very important, and it will be familiar to, I suppose, a lot of our audience, but a lot won't know about this. But before we do that, just to stay with the Tommy Robinson thing, for a BBC program, a flagship program like Panorama, which would have the trust of the British public because it's been around for years and it's done some excellent reporting for years and years. For one of the most senior people associated with that, John Sweeney, we all remember Sweeney famously for the expose of Scientology, which was excellent, when he blew up famously when he met not Tommy Archer, but Ann Archer. So anyway, long story short, so we look at that, it's really important to see a BBC guy basically trying to bribe somebody into giving them a cock and bull story, something that you might have expected from the News of the World. You can't overstate it.
With the telephone, and the Millie Dowler, and what happened to, what was that paper? It doesn't even exist anymore. Was it News of the World?
News of the World, yeah.
That should happen to BBC Panorama now, I believe. The evidence is strong enough. And what I should say as well, this is really important. I've been working very closely with Jonathan Wedger, who you had on the show last week, I think.
John, he's a great guy.
The former Scotland Yard detective, So, I mean, I've been pushing his programme, and I'm very involved in my area of expertise, I think, is really the cover-up of child abuse and VIP paedophiles. But they did a Panorama programme in 2015 with a journalist called Mark Watts, who was involved in Exaro News.
Yeah.
And he's quite switched on. I met him for a drink and went to the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, had a pint with him, met him afterwards, and he said there's no way he was going to talk to the BBC or Panorama, unless it was live, because he knows what they're like doing pre-records. And I now am suspicious of all Panorama programmes. I really am, all of them. Particularly the 2015 one. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on YouTube, but it was very derogatory about certain people like Chris Fay and victims of abuse, and kind of implied that it's all nothing to worry about here, if you know what I mean.
Anna, when that went out, I thought to myself at the time, what an incredibly brazen thing to do. The organisation itself had protected Jimmy Savile. Now I know it's unfair because there were hundreds, possibly thousands of people at the BBC, good people, not in a position of power, who might have heard things about Savile. They couldn't have done anything about it, and I don't want to impugn them at all. But the top brass knew that Savile was a monster beyond anything that any fictional writer could ever come up with. And then in 2015, they were doing a hit job on victims of institutional child abuse. It was beyond brazen. We shouldn't be sensational, but I thought it was evil, that programme. It was sick, personally.
I agree.
Wasn't it?
And what I want to know is, what are these journalists, these supposedly professional journalists, going to do about it? I mean, going back to Syria, I produced... all I do, to be honest with you, Richie, is take someone with the truth, and you meet these people like John Wedger and Robert Stewart, and you think, this person is that you can kind of feel the trauma within them, the lack of acknowledgement of the truth that possesses them, and give them a chance to tell their story and gets really fantastic views for them on social media. So Robert Stewart, well, I don't know, we're up to about 200,000. He's the guy who talked about saving Syria's children. But after that broadcast, which again, I've only broadcast on Facebook because I helped John. I read his Facebook page and Twitter. I got contact from 2 people. One of them, he contacted me via Twitter, and I've been talking to him. He doesn't want his identity to be revealed, but he's quite happy for me to say this. He's just put, I was also a former employee of the BBC as part of their high-risk team, and I also left due to my disgust at the way facts had been ignored. The list is endless. Having just viewed the short video with Robert Stewart, Saving Syria's Children from 2013, I too flagged this up as being staged, along with other numerous failings. I also did the same when I was providing conflict tracking for OSE Syria. The list is endless. I was in Syria in 2018 and again witnessed false reporting whilst failing to report the facts. He mentioned 2 journalists to me, Andrew North and Elliot Higgins. He also found issues with bias with New York Times. He's worked as a security specialist out in Syria for a number of mainstream media organisations, and he doesn't anymore. And I also had somebody else contact me. He was friends with a top BBC executive who raised concerns about this documentary in 2013, and she's been bullied ever since. It's caused extremely serious problems for this individual. And I think there are a number of people at the BBC who are aware of it and are keeping quiet, and I just hope they come forward. I hope things change. I, in a way, by talking about the BBC and the mainstream media and giving them so much power, we're not, I just feel that we need to start calling them the old media, and we are the new media. I mean, you look at Channel 4 News viewing figures on Barb, they get 706,000 views in a week. Well, John and I, on our Facebook page, we've been getting 805,000. He's did a broadcast that's got 350,000. You know, I've tried to contact people like Dorothy Byrne from Channel 4 News. She's the head of current current affairs, and because I'm very interested in Hope de la Garenne, the Jersey children's home. And I've got some fantastic undercover investigative work that I've been doing with that, and I contacted them because I thought they might be interested. And she went, "Oh yeah, no, that's a really interesting one, Hope de la Garenne, but I think we're like 2 years out of date for that one." And I was disappointed, but then I thought, well, sod it, I'll just do it myself. I'll do my own broadcast, put it on Facebook, boost it, put it on YouTube, put it on Twitter, and I'm getting really fantastic figures, 200, 300, and it's only growing. So,
and it will grow, and it'll continue to grow. I mean,
you've got, how many viewers have you got?
Well, the average
listeners, rather.
Well, the average live audience listening now, it's about 85,000. That's just on the radio, but then it gets hundreds of thousands of listens on Podomatic, iTunes, and Spotify. It's ridiculous. And again, it's 5 years old now, so it's built up over time. But I get all told about 1 million unique listeners a week. It's crazy.
Fantastic.
But nobody,
you have advertising. Are you thinking about adding some advertising? Because I think the new media, as in the alternative,
this is the problem,
needs to be a little bit more savvy about that.
Do you know the problem I have with that is because it's global. I mean, probably 43% of the audience is based in the UK, but the rest of the audience is scattered all around the world. But it's interesting you talk about figures, because I had a conversation with the BBC's Nicky Campbell on Twitter about 2 years ago, and it was all very pleasant. And I was asking him to come on the programme, and he said, well, I can't because I'm not allowed to opine. I can't get involved. It's against... And I knew this to be true. Yeah. So I said, well, I'll come on with you then. And he kind of laughed and went, well, you're just anybody. And I said, well, I'm not. And I sent on the metadata from this programme. I said, I'm not just anybody. First of all, I am a nobody. I'm not important. But I said, hundreds of thousands of people a week choose to listen to this. So that should be interesting to you. And if
John gets stopped in the street. You know that, John Wedger.
I'm not surprised John gets stopped.
He gets stopped in the street because, I did a video with him in London, and that's got 300,000 views. It was about 10 days ago.
Yeah, I saw it.
I make sure I edit it. I make sure that I edit it in square and put text on though, because a lot of people watch videos on social media with the sound off. So I'm aware of these little things that you need to do to get. But John's a great guy, and he wasn't given a mainstream media platform. He spent the day with the BBC, and they did listen to him, were interested. But I think he hasn't really been given a platform on the mainstream old media, which I think we need to start calling him.
And you know as well, and I'm so glad you're here, Anna, because I'm always banging on to my listeners about this because of my, media background as well. I didn't reach the heights you reach now in terms of BBC and ITV, but, I did okay. And I'm always banging on to my listeners, saying to them, why do you think an ex-police detective with the credibility that John Wedger has, why do you think he hasn't been given a platform on ITV, Channel 4, BBC or whatever? And I'm glad you're here saying that because it's hugely important. Let me just remind the listeners, Anna Brees is live with us this afternoon. She's going to be with me till the top of the hour, and you can find her at breesmedia.com. Very experienced journalist is Anna, and what she's told you there about those viewing figures on Facebook and across YouTube is true. It is the old media, the BBC. The new media is credible people, qualified people walking away from that and saying, no, there's another story. We'll find the other story and we'll tell you that. So check Anna out at breesmedia.com. Great that somebody is training young journalists to, to do it the right way, to do it the proper way. Let's talk about saving Syria's children, because I covered this. I mean, you talked about Panorama being basically, discontinued, as the News of the World was, quite rightly. But the BBC is surely not fit for purpose. There isn't any disputing what went on with that particular programme. This is a programme that went out. It was about, you can remind us, Anna, it was about an attack on a Syrian school. And it was a very dramatic, very kind of pathos-filled report about the devastation there. And then Robert Stewart started looking into this and found that, well, the whole thing was basically nonsense. Do you want to remind our listeners what happened with that particular programme?
Well, I really would recommend that they watch Media on Trial. It's called Media on Trial. Robert Stewart presents numerous sort of photographic evidence. He's investigated it in such incredible detail that to my mind, there's no doubt that it was a fabricated event. He looks at the doctors, he looks at the injuries. There's an organisation called Hospecs who are involved in mocking up sort of injuries on individuals, burn injuries, and they're very, very similar to the injuries that you see for the people that are being carried into the hospital. He's looked in detail at the backgrounds of the doctors that are there. And at the times that it was supposed to happen. He went to there's a place in London, what was he called? So Ian Pannell was the reporter. He's approached Ian Pannell, and he's also approached the Darren Conway, who was a freelance for the BBC. He was the cameraman and director of Saving Syria's Children, and he worked for a company called In Focus Asia. And he's contacted him, and he's approached him and said, what time did these attacks happen? And they all give a different time.
Yeah. What's
interesting is it was an independent production company called October Films that were involved in the post-production of the editing of this piece. And he said, there would be rushes, there would be all the rushes from that. So somebody's seen it, so many people. I mean, I've had 2 people contact me about Saving Syria's Children from the broadcast that I did with Robert. So I just hope more people find out and more people come forward. But at the end of the day, if you don't pay your TV licence and you watch the BBC, there's enough, I think, evidence now for you to defend yourself in court if you're taken to court. What do you reckon? I mean, that you look at the BBC values and the ethics of what they're supposed to stand for in their charter. How can they justify their existence anymore? And how can you be forced to pay to watch? I work for ITV.
To watch propaganda. Yeah.
I want to watch ITV, but bloody well can't, can I? So I have to pay for the BBC TV license, which I refuse to do.
Yeah, you and me both. I just want to endorse what you're saying. Usually I'd argue with you now. I'd be the devil's advocate and I would argue.
Oh, argue with me.
No, I can't. I can't. No,
there's
because
something else I need to talk to you about with regard to Saving Syria's Children. This is massive.
Just before you do.
Have you heard about Rhiam Delati? Rhiam Delati, he's a BBC producer on the 13th of February.
This year, that's right, yeah. Go ahead.
This is
huge, yeah. I've talked about this. This is massive. Go ahead.
This obviously, and I've only really seen it covered on channels like Russia Today, but on the 13th of February...
He was BBC's Syria reporter, wasn't he? He was a Syria producer for the BBC, Rhiam Delati. Go on, tell us about him.
No, listen, he was actually a researcher in 2013 on the BBC Panorama programme Saving Syria's Children. Now, Robert Stewart and others are not sure really what he's about. But he may have had a crisis of conscience, and it may have come only now, who knows. But he has put on his tweet, give me 2 seconds and I will read it out to you.
This is about the chemical attack.
Sick and tired of activists and rebels using corpses of dead children to stage emotive scenes for Western consumption. Then they wonder why some serious journos are questioning part of the narrative. There's a few tweets that he wrote, and that was really what alerted me to this. And then I started to look into a little bit more detail about Syria. But he was talking about Douma.
April.
Which happened last year.
Yeah, last April. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that attack, that chemical attack, we covered this extensively. And that staggered me. I was actually in bed with pneumonia when he came out with this, Riyam Dalati, in February. Extraordinary Syrian producer for the BBC drops this massive clanger and says that the hospital scene in video footage in April 2018 was actually fake, and he's willing to stand over that.
He used the word staged, didn't he?
Yeah, he used the word staged and said it was fake. Here's the question now. Again, I should be. It's traditional for me to start arguing with you and putting the BBC's side of it, but I can't. But I will ask you this. Can we be certain that the BBC were complicit in the staging, or were the BBC just basically asleep on their watch? Were they out there and just taking other people's word for what was going on, and those who were staging it, BBC was just reporting what they were doing or what they were saying? Because that's up in the air for some people. They'll say, well, did the BBC really take part in staging it, or were they just really crap, those production teams that went out there and didn't realise they were being duped? What do you think?
I can't answer that. I honestly can't answer that. I've spoken to Robert Stewart and I asked him that question, and he... So the reporter, Ian Pannell, who was BBC staff, he no longer works for the BBC. And Darren Conway, I think I got the impression from the anonymous sourcer I've spoken to, who works in security services out there. He works as a consultant and make sure media teams are safe out in Syria. And I think he gave me the impression that they didn't know they were duped. But other people I've spoken to think that they were involved. So I can't answer that.
No, it's very fair. Well, you see, you're honest, right? And it's wonderful. Honestly, look, I can't make a claim that the BBC knew either. We know that a lot of journalists were duped by these, by this so-called White Helmets organisation, these first responders, which, way back, this programme was discussing with various people that the White Helmets were certainly not what they were portrayed to be, and maybe BBC production crews were taken in by the White Helmets and taken in by their claimed impartiality, and they were being fed stuff and they were just swallowing it rather than challenge it. I don't know either. I think you're being very honest there, but it's happened many times.
What I would say is I work with someone called Alistair Bunkle, who is at Sky.
Yes, know of him. Yeah,
He was junior to me in the newsroom at ITV in Oxford, and I tweeted yesterday something about how I was disappointed because he wasn't I'd mentioned Riyam Dalati and asked for a response, and he sent me a message straight away, and he said, Anna, the Russians and Syrians are responsible for the deaths of thousands of innocent children. It's been backed by the UN, OPCW, NATO, and a coalition of 76 different global nations. I have seen the kids dying at first hand. I will not get some of those images out of my head, and I will not engage in any conversation that tries to absolve the regime of blame. It's unacceptable. And then he sent more messages, and he said, I agree that in the course of the conflict there have been casualties, civilian casualties on all sides, and that's tragic, but the Russians and Syrians gassed innocent civilians, and that's not for debate. Now, I've mentioned to him Professor Piers Robinson, who is just about to release a document all about Douma, which is just, it's unbelievable, to be honest. So I hope he reads that. And he just does it. He just can't get his head around it. And then I mentioned Riyam Dalati, and he's just gone quiet then. So I hope he's looking at this stuff. But he's been in Syria. I haven't. I'll be honest with you. They talk about ground truth. And that's why I believe in mobile journalism. It's people that are there, that actually can witness it and can see it. Who am I to say what's going on somewhere else? Who am I? I mean, I don't know, do I? And I don't feel particularly comfortable commenting on Syria because I've only really been involved in giving someone else a chance to tell their story, which is Robert Stewart and Piers Robinson. And he talks about 9/11. He talks about after 9/11 in is it the Chilcot Report?
Yeah, the Chilcot Report, yeah.
How they were going to take down Tony Blair, and the memos saying something like that, taking down 5 countries in 3 years.
Oh no, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, the Chilcot Report looked into the lead up to the Iraq War. The 9/11 report, not the 9/11 report, but just after September the 11th, a U.S. Army general whose name escapes me now, Wesley Clark it was. Yeah. Clark was in the Pentagon and saw documents that said that Syria and Iran and Libya were among 6 or 7 countries that the neoconservatives wanted to change the governments of within the next 10 to 15 years. That was Wesley Clark, yeah. Which
so I'm gonna direct people. It's really important. I'm going to direct people to Media on Trial, Piers Robinson and Robert Stewart. My expertise. I used to work in the Channel Islands. I know quite a lot about Haute de la Garenne, and I know quite a lot about the cover-up in Westminster. And I'm not an expert on those other areas. I do know a lot about the media, and I do know a lot about journalists.
Yeah.
And the over-reliance on official sources as well, which is the big thing. You have to produce content very quickly in a television newsroom. You have a half-an-hour programme to fill. You don't have time to meet people in person. You don't have time to do a lot of research, look on social media, do lots of searching. You have to very often, and I see it on the news channels, they just get a piece of paper from some kind of government comms department that tell them what's been going on, and they repeat it as if it was fact.
And look,
naivety.
I'm your brother. I lived through that for years in commercial radio. It's exactly. I was broadcasting live at WLR-FM in Ireland on the day of September 11, 2001. So I had to spend hours on air with presenters giving a blow-by-blow account of what was happening, and we were getting people on the line from New York City, talking to them, and I found myself within the next couple of days reading reports that a man in a cave in the Tora Bora Mountains in Afghanistan was responsible for it. And it was only a few years later that I had this horrendous sense of embarrassment that I went along with that. I took those wires from independent radio news, from Reuters, and just read them out. Well, of course, rearranged the language for radio scripts and just told people Osama bin Laden did it. I want to say one thing to you. We've got about 6-7 minutes left. Some of my listeners won't like this, but to hell with that. Look, while we're on that subject, and I don't want to go down this route, but while I have an enormous amount of time for Russia Today, and a lot of the people who contribute to it, Russia Today has used people as experts on Syria. I'm thinking of one person in particular whose name I'm not going to mention, but who has sworn allegiance to President Bashar al-Assad, who has said that the greatest moment of my life was meeting the president. The same journalist took photographs of herself in Paris waving a Syrian flag around. And then the same journalist sent a Facebook message to someone about 3 years ago saying that it was important to keep it quiet where there were incidences of Syrian forces committing crimes against the Syrian people because we don't want that to get into the hands of Assad's enemies. Now, Russia Today uses that person all the time. And the sad thing for me about that is the person in question has done some interesting stuff and has put some really interesting stuff in the public domain about Syria. But I can't use it because it's horribly compromised. And what I call the perplexed, those are people who watch the BBC and ITV who don't know anything about Anna Brees and they've never heard about Richie Allen or anybody else. I can't show that person to those people and say, look what's going on in Syria, because that person is horribly compromised. And I've taken this up with RT and they've just ignored me. I said, why do you use people who are blatantly, if not directly working for Assad? And look, I think Bashar al-Assad is in the right in Syria. His government, whether you like it or not, they're in the right. They're on the right side of history on this particular issue, what's happened in Syria. But it doesn't help when you've got people going public and using RT and Press TV saying all this stuff when they're kind of connected to the government. You know what I'm saying, Anna? I think what's good for the goose
yeah,
is...
and I really respect you for not using that individual.
No, I won't. I dropped that individual about 2 years ago, and there was murders over it. What's good for the BBC is good for RT. That's all I'd say on it. Anyway, go ahead.
We just got to, as journalists of media organisations, which you are, and I am, we own a channel, we're editors of a channel, Russia Today are.
Yeah.
You've got to be really careful about agenda. And I was on Sputnik, is it? That's the Russia Today news channel, I think.
Sputnik, yeah, it's a good channel.
The questions they asked me were all, is it Sputnik?
Sputnik, that's right. Called? Yeah, Sputnik, that's the one.
Yeah. And they got a few little details wrong, which I didn't think was particularly good, but there was an agenda in their questions. I trained to be a psychotherapist, and a question can give so much away. And, we don't, in a way, I find journalists are almost becoming more and more irrelevant. Our questions and our opinions. Journalists existed in an era where somebody had to collate and disseminate information, but we can just talk to each other now. And one of the things I really love is something called Periscope, which you can talk to people live anywhere in the world and ask them questions. So you can talk to people in Syria or Korea or Australia or anywhere, where there's been a weather event or a terrorist event. And it's journalists as well, over-reliance on official sources, government departments, communications departments, and not having the time or trust for people and their views. But I'm finding journalism and journalists more and more irrelevant, if I'm honest. But we've all got to be careful about it. And the problem I've got is I want to talk to, and I advise John Wedger, and he'll just talk to anyone.
Yeah, he's great, John.
Yeah. Any time, like a radio station with 100 people, he'll talk to anyone. And I said, look, John, that's great, because he wants as many people to hear as possible. But the problem is, you get things like, oh, you can't talk to him. He's friends with David Icke. You can't talk to them because they're Russian.
It's a nonsense, isn't it? What a nonsense that is.
I can't even mention Tommy Robinson. Just goodness sake. And it's frustrating. It is. It's frustrating.
Do you know the best thing? Sorry to interrupt you, Anna. The best thing that can happen to, if the independent media is an arena and if it's an emerging place, the best thing that can happen to it is people who've worked for the biggest institutions in the country, like yourself, can come out and speak to people, as you're doing through breesmedia.com, and educate them. I used to work for City and Guilds after I first left commercial radio, and some of what you're doing, and I'm sure you're doing it a lot better than I did it, but I tried to do that as well. I tried to say to young journalists, listen, there's the right way to investigate information, to authenticate it, and then there's the wrong way, and sadly the wrong way seems to be more prevalent in mainstream media than it ever was before. But the best thing that could happen to the independent media is somebody like yourself coming out and talking about these issues, because I can bang on about it forever on programs like this, but when somebody says, well, look, I've been at the BBC, ITV for years, this is what's been happening, you obviously don't have there's no revenge in you, you've got no axe to grind with anybody, you've got your own career, you're just calling it the way it is. I think it's hugely important, and I think you hinted a few minutes ago about more coming forward. I think the floodgates will open in the next couple of years. I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg now in terms of journalists leaving the mainstream and festing up, for want of a better way of putting it, about what really goes on, Anna. I'm very optimistic about that.
I'm in a position where I've my dad's my hero, and he always used to say, stand up for what you believe in, and I've got very strong values, but, people do have bills to pay, and I think the ego plays a huge role as well, especially in television. And whenever I saw anyone in television, they all wanted to be on screen. Yeah. And they were rushing back to watch their presentation. They weren't meeting a whistleblower in a pub after work. TV journalists absolutely are ego complete. In my opinion, the majority of them are very ego driven, and it's very difficult to give up that feeling. And I had it when I was at the BBC. Everyone made a fuss. My mum, used to work in charity shop. Everyone used to say, "Oh, my, your daughter works at the ITV," and then I stopped working there, and they never asked about me anymore. And and it's a nice feeling being on television. It's a nice feeling having all that attention. It's hard to give it up. And And I can understand that. And I've written a book called Making the News, and I talk about the ego. If anyone wants to buy my book, a little plug there at the end.
Yeah, no harm in that. No harm in that. It's Brees, BRESmedia.com.
Making the News 2018, and I talk about this. But I talk about how you can use your mobile phone to create great professional video content, boost it or share it on social media. And I create TV quality, standard video content. And I put it on social media, and it does really, really well. And I've got some local news stations here where I live in South Wales, and I'm reaching, for example, I got 22,000 views in a small town where the newspaper only sells 3,000 copies, and I achieved that by a small boost on Facebook for 80 quid, and it's a very powerful combination, really great video content with small paid boosts on social media, and we don't really need, certainly BBC local radio or the local stations. And the one thing I would say is when I worked in regional news, they always used to go on the national news and say, now we go over to the news where you are.
That's
but
right.
It was like, I was living in Gloucester and it was news about Leicester, or I was living in South Wales and it's about Anglesey. It's not the news where you are. The news where you are the local village hubs, Facebook groups, that are run by citizen journalists who are probably not getting paid, but they are active, regular local news content, and they're serving a purpose, on social media. But I just find it fascinating. I love the media. I love talking about the media, and I love, what you're doing and people like you are doing. And I think it's a very exciting time to be alive and be involved in this industry.
It's a brilliant time. Listen, thanks for coming on today and reminding some of our listeners, but for a lot of our listeners, they wouldn't have remembered saving Syria's children and all the problems with that, and the Douma attack last year, and the Syrian producer who's come out to speak about that this February. And to be fair to you, you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter what anybody might think about the politics of Tommy Robinson. The attempted stitch-up of him by John Sweeney and Panorama is indicative of a rotten to the core organisation. It's unacceptable, and people need to know more about it. BreesMedia.com.
I have faith in them. There are people at the BBC. I have faith in them. They need to come forward. They're good people. There are some fantastic journalists there. Let's just encourage them. If any of them are watching, or anyone knows anyone who works for the BBC, to stand up and sort this out.
Brilliant way to leave it. Anna, you're welcome back anytime. The door is always open. And if you're in Manchester anytime, let us know. And I'm buying the coffee or a glass of wine. Thanks for coming on. I really mean that. It's brilliant to have you on the programme.
Lovely to talk to you.
It was
Keep
a pleasure.
up the good work.
You too, Anna. Thanks so much. By the way, Anna is she's on Twitter. It's Brees, BREES Anna. So it's at Brees Anna. It's BreesMedia.com. There'll be a link there to the book. And she's pretty special, I think. It's great when you get people who have emerged recently from that world, that crazy world of BBC, ITV, Channel 4, and they're prepared to talk about it and lay it on the line as to what they've been doing and how they've been going about their business, how they've been faking, or how they've... Again, we don't know whether they faked what happened in 2013 at that school in Syria. We don't know. And it's wrong to say they did. But even if they were duped by it, well, they're not fit for purpose if they were duped by it. If they were duped by the white helmets, and if they're just taking information from people and then broadcasting it without checking the facts. But it's happened so many times with the BBC, the Iraq War. Where was the BBC when Tony Blair was lying through his teeth and saying that Iraq could launch against the UK in 45 minutes? Where was the BBC? We all know about Andrew Gilligan, don't we? We all know about Dr. David Kelly and all the rest of it, right? I'm going to take headlines from FSN. Let's see what the latest is. Theresa May, there might be an update on this meeting that May's had with the European Union. When I say the European Union, with EU leaders. There's supposed to be a press conference any minute, but it hasn't happened yet. Let's get the latest headlines anyway from Ollie Barrett at FSN in London. The time is exactly 4.5 minutes past 6 for Wednesday, the 21st of March 2019. Ollie Barrett.
From Feature Story News in London, I'm Ollie Barrett. New Zealand's announced it's banning military-style assault weapons immediately. Officials in Mozambique say as many as 15,000 people still need rescuing after Cyclone Idai. UK Prime Minister Theresa May is in Brussels, where she says she still hopes Britain will leave the bloc with a deal. And Eurostar passengers are being told not to travel on the train services between Paris and London until April because of protests by customs officers.
Cheers, Ollie. Thank you very much. I'm going to be phoning Professor Michael Masters in Montana in about 60 seconds' time. Absolutely fascinating this is. He's an academic, a man of science, works at a university in Butte, and he's written a book about extraterrestrials, looking into whether they are human beings in the very, very distant future coming back here. It's fascinating stuff. It's nice to take that direction and talk about, because I get hammered for not talking about the esoteric as much as maybe some of our listeners would like, but we're going to do it now. It's your Richie Allen Show. Do consider supporting it if you can. Every little helps, as they say.
The Richie Allen Show relies on your support. Go to richieallen.co.uk and set up a monthly donation today.
Right, and a lot of tweets came in there when I was speaking with Anna. To follow what people are tweeting me, you need only go to twitter.com, where it says search Twitter. Just put Richie Allen Show, all one word, in there. Couldn't be simpler. Richie Allen Show, all one word. Press enter and you will see what other people are tweeting me. As they say back in the old country, that would be Ireland, there is a grand stretch in the evenings now. By the way, our clocks go forward a week on Sunday. That's Sunday morning, March, whatever it is. Have I gotten it wrong again, have I? The 31st, isn't it? The clocks go forward, so keep an eye on that, particularly producers of radio content, those of you who often host guests from the United States and from elsewhere. Now, this is exciting stuff. I love this. Could UFOs, aliens, could they actually be human beings or a future version of us? Well, this is a question that's being asked by Dr. Michael P. Masters. Michael is a professor of biological anthropology, and he specialises in human evolutionary anatomy, archaeology and biomedicine. Now, the book, and I'm going to tweet out links to where you can buy this book because I know it's right up your street. It's called Identified Flying Objects, a Multidisciplinary Scientific Approach to the UFO Phenomenon. He teaches at Montana Tech in Butte, Montana. Great pleasure to welcome to the programme Dr. Michael P. Masters. Michael, welcome, sir. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's an honour to have you on. This is exciting stuff for me. It's a subject that's really close to my heart. How does a scientist like yourself, an anthropologist, how do you find yourself getting interested in ufology and extraterrestrials? Where did it start, Michael?
Well, it's actually kind of been a lifelong pursuit. It started when I was actually 8 years old. I snuck down the stairs late at night when my parents had some friends over, and I overheard them telling a story about how my father saw some strange lights in the sky before I was born, actually. But hearing that story just kind of piqued my interest and got me thinking. And not long after that, he bought a book called Communion that has a picture of your standard archetypal extraterrestrial on the cover. And I remember just looking up at it as a kid, and I sort of had this flash and saw, sort of a chimpanzee-like form, an early hominin form, a human form, and then this alien form, just all kind of next to each other in this mental image. And just made me think, could there be some relationship there? And growing up with no knowledge of evolution or really any sort of biological knowledge, it was a very foreign concept. But the more I learned about it, and the more I learned about the process of evolutionary change, and especially diving deep into human evolutionary anatomy for my PhD research and my current research program, there just became more and more things that kind of explain this phenomenon in the context of time travel and human evolution that makes sense, especially when compared to the extraterrestrial model that we're being visited by creatures that evolved on a different planet elsewhere in the universe.
You've given me goosebumps because you mentioned communion, and I did a series of interviews many years ago with Whitley Strieber.
Oh, nice.
And I loved having him on the programs. This is many moons ago.
Yeah.
So it started for you then when you were a young lad, and you obviously did very well then in school and at high school, and you get into science. You must, along the way, of course, you will have encountered people, fellow academics, fellow scientists, who must have been amused, Michael, at your interest in this subject, because I often think it's incompatible with those who are very serious. Now, you are a serious scientist, of course. You're a qualified man, you're a lecturer, a teacher, but a lot of scientists would be maybe reluctant to be associated with this field of research. Did you encounter much mirth and amusement over the years?
Well, to be honest, knowing the system and knowing how academia is set up, I largely kept it quiet. I didn't tell any of my colleagues in graduate school why I was in graduate school to study anthropology, or even after that, after I graduated, I didn't really talk about it much. It's only been in the last 8 months or so that I have, and the main reason for that is because I saw how the system was set up. I saw how graduate students are treated in graduate schools, basically small children doing grunt work and, barely making enough to live. And I realized that was not the time nor the place to begin talking about this. Also, I didn't have the breadth of knowledge I needed to really discuss this in a meaningful way. So having a long-term plan, I essentially waited until I got tenure. I just last year was promoted to full professor. So I don't really have anything at stake as far as, something that could hinder my career. And I'm also very proud of this research. I'm very confident in the way I've brought together the fields of physics, astrobiology, astronomy, and obviously biological anthropology to make a strong case for this. And the book's written for academics just as much as it is those in the UFO community or the lay reader. It's really written to provide a better explanation for this phenomenon and, to discuss time. A lot of people don't talk about time. They don't really understand time, and especially the physics of time. So to bring all of this together in a book now and to interact with my academic colleagues and, have this conversation with them now, I feel like it's going to be a much more informed discussion, and I really hope to bring them into the conversation and to bring skeptics into the conversation to really look at what's being presented here in the context of this extraterrestrial model and in the context of this UFO phenomenon, and really start to have a more informed discussion on a much broader scale.
It'll be really interesting to see. The book is only very recently published, so the reaction from academia is of course going to be fascinating. Before we talk about why, because we've grown up, and I loved the subject as a young boy as well, and I was a massive fan of all the science fiction TV shows and films, and I always believed. Well, reading Communion, I read Communion. I was pretty young. I think Whitley's book came out in the 80s. I think I would have been probably 12, 13 years old when I read it, and I was gobsmacked and watched the film with Christopher Walken. I think I just loved it, and I've always believed people, not everybody, but I think the vast majority of people who
absolutely
are genuine, that something has definitely happened to them. I've never felt that they were trying to pull the wool over our eyes. Before we talk about where you came to feel that they're not maybe otherworldly in terms of other planets and maybe different species, and why you think they might be future versions of ourselves, you've set yourself up for a fall here, Professor, because you said we don't understand time. I'm going to set you a challenge, my friend, for our listeners. For the dumbest person on earth, can you explain, so that we can understand it, the concept that time might not be linear? How do you explain that to somebody without it going over their heads? Because I can barely understand it.
Yeah, our day-to-day experiences certainly appear to be linear. There's a past cause that leads to a future effect, and we grow up thinking that from a very young age. My small children get things in kindergarten and first grade that says, put this in order, which one happened first. And so we're very much enculturated to understand time in this way. But in the context of physics and how physicists understand time, probably the easiest way to think of it is as a giant block, and they refer to it as block time for that reason, where all events, all moments from the very beginning of the universe, when matter first exploded in the Big Bang, to the very end of the universe, all of those moments exist as one giant four-dimensional block of space-time. And the way that we understand it, and the reason we see it as linearly, is because we move through it as cognizant beings. We have brains that need to make sense of it. And so there's sort of this disconnect between the physics of time and our biological perception of time, where our brain almost imposes this linear progression of events, where if you look at the physical properties of the universe, physical processes, they're time reversible. They make just as much sense running forward as they do running backward. So in the context of this omnipresent four-dimensional block time, it's easier to understand how all of those things exist as one static entity, and we move through them. So in the context of going backward in time, I discussed this in the book, the actual physical mechanisms involved in this, the way in which this process could unfold. There's still a lot we don't know, and there's still a lot of materials we'll have to develop in order to sustain the forces involved in bending space-time. But there's been research done on this since the early 1900s, looking at the Lenz-Thurian effect and how spinning massive bodies warp space-time. Einstein wrote a lot about this in 1915 with general relativity, and there's been a lot of derivations of his field equations that show that there is no causality violation. You can't make something change in the past that will change the future, because it all exists as this giant static block of four-dimensional space-time. So by spinning massive objects rapidly, it may be possible to bend time upon itself, to reorient what are known as light cones toward the past, and to actually create closed time-like loops, or to visit the past through the manipulation of the electromagnetic force and the gravitational force. So there's a lot of moving parts, and if you look at a UFO, if you look at the structure of it, we have this expression in biology that form follows function, but it goes for everything. You've got a fork, and you can look at it and say, well, that's probably to stab food and shove it into our mouths. And if you look at the structure of UFO and the way they're described in these instances of close encounters, the form of them seems to have the same qualities that we see in modern research, in current modern physics research, that demonstrate that we may be able to create these closed time-like loops with a massive body that has electromagnetic properties that can create this Lenz-Thurian effect and warp space-time to return to the past. So the UFO itself is likely the very device that may allow our future progeny to visit the past in the distant future.
To come back, let me just remind our listeners who will be joining us all the time, it's just after 17 minutes past 6 here in the UK. Listeners joining us all around the world, of course, through various platforms. You're listening to Dr. Michael P. Masters. Michael is a professor of biological anthropology at Montana Tech in Butte, Montana, and he's written this fascinating book, Identified Flying Objects, a Multidisciplinary Scientific Approach to the UFO Phenomenon. And I know our listeners are going to be all over this, and we will put out links to where you can get it. Go to all good online bookshops. There is one major one, but I'm not supposed to mention it, but you know the one I'm talking about, to buy this particular book. You've just helped me understand the film Interstellar, and this is not a joke, Michael. I've watched Interstellar 3 times. Love it, get lost in it, can't believe it. I go to a different place watching it, and at the end of it I come away going, what the hell just happened there? You're talking about a kind of a tesseract thing, isn't that right? This is what this is relevant, this block of time that you've talked about. Is that what they call it in Interstellar, the tesseract, where it's happening, everything is happening all the time, everything that ever happened is always happening and will always happen, kind of a thing? Or am I on the wrong track there?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say I actually haven't seen that movie.
Oh, get onto it, Michael.
I'm going to watch it as soon as I get home, because, yeah, I've heard it's a fantastic film, and it deals with a lot of these aspects of, distant planets and space travel. But yeah, I mean, Carl Sagan in his book Contact, and then the film that was made with Jodie Foster, did the same thing, where there's this spinning, highly energetic body that allows people to move through this four-dimensional block time. And it's another way of thinking of it is to a physicist named Paul Davies in his book About Time describes it this way. And I think it's very useful for people to really understand the dimension of time, is that if you have an airplane circling above in the XY dimension, just a flat circle, and then you take pictures of it every 5 minutes and stack those pictures on top of each other. It's easier to see the representation of that fourth dimension of time We experience it. It's all around us, but we can't. Our brains aren't set up to conceptualize 4 dimensions. We can handle 3. So by that stack of pictures of Polaroids of the plane circling, you can see that build up, and you can see that other layer of time. And so, yeah, and looking at block time, or landscape time as it's also known, which is the dominant theory among physicists, what's interesting about it is that if all events that ever existed in the universe exist in this static block of time, you visiting the past doesn't change anything. You're always a part of that past. You were always there. It doesn't cause some ripple effect or send us into a different dimension or with different outcomes, even though you see that in media a lot, in different films and television shows. You just always were a part of that point in time, in that past. And physicists know with absolute certainty that when you grow up, if you visited yourself in the past, if you grow up to be that age at which you remembered yourself, we know with absolute certainty that you will be the one going back to visit yourself in the past, because those two things are intricately linked. They're integrated. They're connected across this giant 4-dimensional block of space-time.
Oh, this is amazing stuff, Michael. And there are questions coming in, and I'm going to allow you to be professorial. And by that I mean you can get annoyed if you want. You can say, look, that's a silly question. Let's talk about something else.
We never say that.
Listen,
we love all questions.
I sat through 1,000 lectures at university. I was stupid enough to go twice. And I remember some grumpy professors in my time, let me tell you. Listeners are asking about things like deja vu. Sometimes it's overwhelmingly powerful. Yeah. It's so powerful sometimes that you actually... Now, I can only say this has happened to me once in my life, but I do remember being in a conversation with somebody and being able to predict what was going to happen next. And it wasn't something so silly and benign. It was something that was fairly difficult to imagine. And I got that crazy, dizzying feeling that I'd been through the experience in the past. So deja vu fits into what you're talking about here.
It does very much, and this isn't in the book. Unfortunately, I wanted to write about it. The next book,
there'll be a sequel. There'll be a sequel. Yeah. Absolutely, go ahead, Michael.
Well, I have very, very intense deja vu, and it's not, like you said, it's not that feeling like, oh, I've been here before. It's very specific to that moment, and in fact, I dream these things. I have dreams about these moments, oftentimes 5-10 years before they happen, but on occasion, and there's been times where I had the dream and then I was in that extremely benign scenario, a week later. And yeah, it's easy to remember it. I remembered my children. I remembered my wife long before I ever met them.
Wow.
Simply because they were in so many of my dreams. And it's at the point now where I'll have a dream. My wife's like, is that a real one or a fake one? And then we have to differentiate. But yeah, it's never a major event. It's not like, a building blowing up and sending shrapnel my way or anything like that. It's just these simple day-to-day events. And there have been a few times that's happened to me too, where it lasted so long in my dream and went from my subconscious dream state into my conscious memory that I could even remember what was going to be said next and what was going to happen. It's very short. It's only 5, 7, maybe 10 seconds at the most. But that indicates to me too that those moments are structured that way, that they're always a part of that future. And I'm just getting to the point where I live in them. And what it also indicates is that our subconscious is able to access these things in a different way, that our consciousness maybe isn't bound by the physical laws that our physical form is, that our bodies are meant to exist within and follow the rules of. So maybe our consciousness can transcend it. And to go a little farther, what it also indicates to me, and how I had to come up with an explanation of this for myself, is that I've potentially lived this same life over and over, hundreds, thousands of times, where that light at the end of the tunnel that people talk about at death may simply be the light at the end of the birth canal, where you come out, start life over, and your consciousness resets with apparently maybe some subconscious memories still within, or able to transcend that fabric of time a little bit. So yeah, I see deja vu as a really interesting thing that needs a lot more research and a lot more explanation, because it's a very fascinating thing that many people experience.
Michael, this is Brilliant stuff. Michael P. Masters is our guest, Dr. Michael P. Masters. He's on the line from Montana Tech in Butte, Professor of Biological Anthropology, and his new book, Identified Flying Objects, a Multidisciplinary Scientific Approach to the UFO Phenomenon, is a must-read. Terrific. This is so important, this stuff. You know, somebody said to me once before, somebody agrees, somebody's been on the programme that agrees with you, the light at the end of the tunnel being the reintroduction to, you know, your life again. It sounds horribly depressing, but it doesn't need to be depressing. You know, if the consciousness kind of resets then. Now, loads of questions coming in. I better get to some of these, Michael, or I'll be lynched later on for not asking you. Future versions of ourselves coming here as you know, as what we understand to be in UFO craft or as extraterrestrials. What if they're consciously deciding to do that because they've understood how to master the technology? What's the payoff for them? Would it be almost exclusively tourism?
Oh no, I don't think so at all. I make the case in the book that it's probably research and very potentially anthropological research. I've worked at archaeological dig sites in South Africa with an Australopithecus site, Makapansgat specifically, 3.5 million years ago, you know, finding fragmented pieces of our hominin ancestors. I worked at a Neanderthal site in southern France, Chépinot-à-Jonzac specifically, and it's the same thing, you know, that's a little more recent, so we're finding things that are more intact, but all we have is teeth, bones, stone tools beginning around 3 million years ago. So if we were able to go back and pick these individuals up, we could learn so much more, not just about their anatomy and physiology, but about their cognition, their language, their overall life way, their lifestyle, how they make the tools, how they interact with each other, their social structure. And that would give us far more knowledge than we could ever get from digging through layers of dirt and analyzing all of the morphological remains, which is what we do now. And again, you know, connecting the past, present, and future, the things that are so commonly reported in these instances of close encounters and specifically abduction cases. And again, not all of them are real. There's some crazy people out there, but there's also a lot of consistency among these reports where you see the same sorts of things happening. It's usually someone, you know, being put in a state of paralysis, skin samples are taken, hair samples, fecal samples, which is probably what gave rise to the infamous anal probe aspect of UFOs.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
And these are all the same things I would do as a paleoanthropologist and my academic anthropological colleagues would do if we also had time travel technology. We would be collecting DNA. We would be collecting, you know, all of these different samples and running tests and really trying to understand our hominin ancestors with this incredible four-dimensional archaeological tool of time travel.
Michael, there's a question there. There is. I better jump in because I'll forget to ask this. Sorry again to interrupt you, but this is important. Very interesting. You talked about the anal probe aspect of it. Why then are people left with great trauma, Michael? Because I know you've interviewed people and you've met people, and I've had some people come on the programme talking about it. We talked about Whitley Strieber. Why couldn't such an advanced version of ourselves do that without causing seemingly fairly nasty trauma to the subject on the end of it, if you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, imagine waking up and seeing these, you know, big-headed, big-eyed, skinny, bipedal creatures standing over you in the middle of the night. I mean, I don't care who it is. That's going to freak you out.
Horrendous, yeah.
Yeah, and then, you know, all the things that happen, it's so far detached from everyday life and then our normal reality. But in their defense, in almost every reported instance of abduction, they're trying to be calming. They're trying to say no harm will come to you. Just relax. We won't hurt you. And they try to put them back with clouded memories, it would seem. That's a very common thing in abduction reports too, that try to erase the memory of it even happening, which in itself, you know, probably causes extra anxiety because they're not really sure what happened or how to explain it. But I do talk about this in the book a little bit too, is the farther you get from our current position in time, the less human we probably seem to them. In the same way that we do research on mice differently than we do on chimpanzees, because they feel closer to us, they seem much more like us. The farther you get into the future, coming back, the more primitive we probably seem, and the less they're probably concerned about causing us anxiety and emotional stress. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, currently we have the IRB process, at least in the U.S. and I think elsewhere, the Institutional Review Board, that looks at our research and makes sure we're not harming children or prisoners or anything like that. And it's likely to still exist in the future. We're still talking about humans. If we wanted to go back and research Homo erectus 1.5 million years ago, we would probably have to go through a lot of safety protocols and, just make sure we're being cautious of them and their humanity, even though it is a much more primitive form of us today.
You've answered brilliant stuff. You've answered a question from a listener who talked about how far into the future or into the past, as it might be, not to be churlish, might this version of us be, because in all of the encounters and in the descriptions, Michael, as you've just talked about there, they look like if it is us, well, it must be millions of years for that amount of evolution to happen, for us to look so different. I know it's still, a humanoid body with arms and legs, but it's a million miles away from what we look like today, right?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, a lot of the vetted reports, many of them, they're very like insect-like, alien, very, reptilian, I think is what they're compared to in some cases. And that's more likely a representation of what I refer to in the book as temporal ancestry. We have geographic ancestry now, which is very intuitive. You can tell if someone's from Southeast Asia or, from Europe or Sub-Saharan Africa. And, geographic races could potentially persist into the future. But when you're talking about backward time travel, once we develop this technology, we're not likely to just stop doing it. Once we have the ability to learn so much about the past in very interpersonal ways, we're not likely to stop doing it. The same way we didn't stop using tools, we didn't stop using fire once we developed those technologies and realized the benefit of them. So yeah, we may be seeing individuals that might be 10,000 years in our future who would be expected to look very much like us, maybe with some slight differences. But then if you go 100,000 years into the future or 1 million years into the future, then you would expect to see, much more overt differences. In the same way that if we look back, the main evolutionary trend has been increased brain size, and specifically an increase in the roundness of the skull, what we call cranial globularity, a retracted face, smaller face. We've maintained bipedalism, we've been losing our hair, but you do have some close encounters in which people describe very human-like, almost Norwegian. For some reason, that keeps being brought up. Chinese-like characteristics with the large, kind of slanted almond-shaped eyes. Some of them even have hair, which would indicate that they're closer to us, more proximate in time. But then, you have some that are described as tall, very skinny, frail-looking, but still with the very large eyes, very large bulbous brain that are most likely from a more distant point in our future.
We are talking about identified flying objects, a multidisciplinary scientific approach to the UFO phenomenon. It's a brand new book from Dr. Michael P. Masters from Montana Tech in Butte, Montana. Massive excitement around the book. Thanks for giving us your time, Michael. We've got another 15, 20 minutes if you can stick around with us, because it's really great to be talking about this today. It is. It's on everybody's mind. The people who listen to this program talk about it all the time. Richie, talk more about these subjects because they're hugely important. And I don't know how I can choose between some of these questions because they're so interesting, these questions. You talked about the great places you've been, Michael, looking at artifacts and hieroglyphics and stuff. What about some of the structures on planet Earth that we see today that there's still so much mystery about in terms of why were they built? We look at the pyramids and we believe that they were monuments to the pharaohs or, the gods or the leaders of the day. But then I've had people on this program, sometimes men and women of science like yourself, who think that there's some really very difficult mathematical equation that needs to be solved about these things, because maybe pyramids and some of these things, maybe there are some clues to time travel in some of these structures on planet Earth. Now, I know you've heard this before. What do you think of that as a theory?
Well, it's difficult because, as anthropologists, and especially in doing archaeology, we have a very good representation of incremental changes that have taken place over the long history of these cultures, prehistorically and historically. And if you look at all of that continuously, you can see how just through the development of advancements, especially agriculture, which is one of the main reasons we had these civilizations develop in Egypt, the Indus River Valley, Mesopotamia, and so on, you can see that they just sort of moved slowly forward with their technology, and especially after agriculture. So I don't feel that we really need to interject any sort of extraterrestrial influence or any sort of influence by our future progeny. And in fact, they're clearly incentivized not to just come crashing in and make their presence known. I think a lot of the reason why this is such a controversial issue and why we don't have clear proof of their existence is because even though you don't change the past, you don't change the future by being a part of it, you still complicate things. You still create different sort of webs of interaction that exist as part of these closed time-like curves. So I think they would be incentivized not to really interject themselves too much in the past either. And honestly, we don't need that explanation in our scientific understanding of archaeology.
That's interesting. And presumably then, in the very far-off future, there would be a strict code of conduct governing traveling back in time, even though, as you said, Michael, you couldn't change the future, but you could complicate things. I'm not trying to be childish about this, but you would imagine in the future, if money is still part of our society, you wonder about things like that. You could go back and you could use it for nefarious reasons.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that shows up in films all the time where someone gets access to this technology, they go back, they buy stocks, they do sports gambling. And yeah, I'm sure there would be very strict, and it's bound to be extremely expensive too. The amount of energy needed to warp space-time to that extent will be something that only, I'm sure, major governments could do, and probably collaboration among governments, much like what we have with the International Space Station. So I think it'll be inherently restricted simply because of economic limitations, but also because of those things like not wanting, to really mess with the Neanderthals or something like that. Yeah. Just to try to keep it scientific. And like you said at the start of the show, tourism is likely going to be a part of it. Stephen Hawking, who was staunchly opposed to this idea of backward time travel and advocated for something known as the chronology protection conjecture, said very famously and very often that we'll never be able to time travel because we're not inundated by time tourists. And I make the argument in the book that we possibly are, and that these UFOs and these extraterrestrials, as I call them in the book, are likely on some level tourists, but they're just operating under the rules of conduct that are put forward in the future to remain somewhat less overt and to not really interject themselves into past periods of time.
Really good. Now, question that's been asked commonly, and I know you will not have the answer to this, but my listeners will ask for a bit of speculation on behalf of the professor here. What about our governments? Can we trust our governments in terms of what they know and what they don't know? What about hidden space programs? Do our governments know more than they let on?
Yeah, you're right. I try not to get into that too much in the book, just for obvious reasons. I try to avoid any sort of speculation and just keep it rooted in what we know, what we can know, also acknowledge what we can't know. However, if we are talking about future technology that's far more sophisticated than what we have today, and if there was an instance, Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 is probably the most widely known. If there was an instance in which a government acquired highly advanced technology that's actually built upon our own, obviously, if it exists in our future, then they would be extremely incentivized to guard that and to reverse engineer it, to develop this technology, which could be extremely useful in, the arms race, global warfare, as part of the military industrial complex, the amount of money that could be made if you're able to harness these electromagnetic propulsion technologies and, much later, eventually, potentially, the time travel aspects of it too. So I definitely think, and some have been more open. In Canada, there was a program called Project Magnet where they're actively seeking out people's experiences to try to understand this propulsion system and how the electromagnetic force is used. And they were very open about it. In the US, it's been completely different. There's been Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book. And the stated goal of many of these, and especially Project Grudge, was to get people to stop talking about it, to try to demonize them, make them seem crazy so that it didn't come into the public conversation. And unfortunately, I'm still dealing with the fallout of that today. People are still hesitant to talk about it. And much of that is just a cultural hangover of these institutionalized efforts by the U.S. government that, maybe coincidentally, maybe not, started in 1947. 1948 especially is when these programs came out. So no, there's definitely an indication that there's something going on. We wouldn't have these institutions that are actively researching this for so long if it wasn't a real phenomenon. And they wouldn't, in my opinion, be out there trying to quell interest and discussion about it if they hadn't maybe acquired something that they would like to keep secret.
You old coincidence theorist, you. This is brilliant stuff, Michael. It really is. Loads of, dozens of questions coming in. Isn't it amazing how Hollywood, year in, year out, and the biggest television production companies are obsessed with the subject matter, aren't they? What do you think of that? Where, again, is that a coincidence? Is it just one of those things? Or again, might there be something subconsciously going on that they're pursuing, films and television shows about this subject? What do you think?
Well, I mean, it has been of interest for a long time. And even though those programs that I just mentioned have come out and tried to diminish the interest, and it's always been something that Hollywood's had fun with and made tons of money. Steven Spielberg, with Close Encounters, with E.T., with Star Wars. So I think there's still money to be made from it. Some within the UFO community feel that there is possibly disclosure coming soon and that we're being inundated with this more and more because they're trying to sort of condition people for some sort of actual reality that exists around this, because it'd be hard for people, I think, if all of a sudden just UFOs come down from the sky and say, hey, it's been us from the future the whole time, no need to freak out. But people would freak out. That's very different. It really is a leap forward in our conceptualization of reality. So even if they understood that they aren't a threat, other than the occasional anal probe maybe, that there is something going on here, and it's somewhat hard to conceptualize and process. But I don't know if that's true. We won't know if that's true until there is some form of disclosure. But it's something that's been batted around among those in the UFO community. And my daughter in second grade, I see her bring home papers with UFOs, aliens, even one about time travel, actually, last year when she was in second grade. And there could be some sort of conditioning aspect to that. I don't know. That's purely speculation and does kind of border on conspiracy theory a little bit. But it's interesting to consider. It
is, and your mind is wide open, Michael, by the sounds of it. Michael P. Masters is a professor of biological anthropology at Montana Tech in Butte, Montana. His book is Identified Flying Objects, a Multidisciplinary Scientific Approach to the UFO Phenomenon. Check it out on Amazon. I shouldn't mention Amazon, but it's on there. If Michael wants to give us any more links in a minute, I'm happy to do that. We will, of course, tweet links to it as well. Massive interest in this afternoon, Thursday's programme, coming up for 16 minutes to the top of the hour. I had Rich Terrell from NASA on the programme about 18 months or so ago. It's a lovely interview, very interesting. And Rich has gone down the road of wondering whether future human beings or a far more advanced version of us might have created our reality. the simulation model or the simulation theory. And that, listening to you today, Michael, and I'm loving listening to you, by the way, genuinely, I'm not sycophantic and I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. I think what he said is not incompatible with what you're saying and what you've said. What do you think of that? That some future version of us might have created our reality for us? That might explain maybe on one level why we get visitation.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting idea. I think part of the issue would be, what is reality? What does that mean? How do we define reality? Are we talking about some sort of simulation that takes place in some sort of projection that's being presented around us? And I mean that's definitely something to consider. There's a lot of interpretations of this phenomenon, and especially once you start getting into the weeds of time and our perception of time and how little we really understand time itself and now, this concept of now and the present. That's a huge aspect of our reality. It's a big part of trying to make sense of what we're doing, how we're moving through this thing around us. And yeah, I think it's important to consider all options. The main thing I'm trying to do is focus on our physical reality, what we know, the modern research in astrobiology, physics, anthropology, and astronomy, and what we know now, looking especially back toward the past. And I'm not making any predictions about what's going to influence us in the future, or what forces of evolution or what cultural factors. I simply look at the long 6 to 8 million year evolutionary history of our hominin lineage in the context of these morphological changes, long-term cultural changes, more recent things like craniofacial feminization, where men and women start to have more paedomorphic characteristics, more like those of our children, our ancestral children, and understand how those projected forward may link us now to those distant descendants of ours in the future, if they are indeed the ones we're seeing. But I absolutely think everything should be considered at this point, because when we have so many unanswered questions, we can't just immediately dismiss anything. I think it all needs to be considered. It must be
an incredibly satisfying, sometimes I would imagine frustrating, field of science, of interest for you, Michael. I imagine there's never a dull moment. I mean, you must be hearing from people from all over the world all the time. I imagine you're learning something new on a daily basis. Incredibly exciting, I would imagine, for you.
Oh, it's great. No, I mean, just the people that, and a big part of it is like I said, there's just this stigma around it, and by coming out, as an actual researcher, a lecturer, professor, and talking about this in real terms and with a conservative approach, really rooted in science and the principle of parsimony, Occam's razor, I think it encourages people to feel like they can talk about their experiences too. And I've been getting emails and phone calls, and people have been sending me books about encounters, and it's been extremely exciting to see all of this and to hear people's stories and to really, provide them with something too. A lot of people are just desperate for some sort of, more grounded explanation for these, and I, hopefully, this book will help provide that.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm glad you mentioned Occam's razor, because it's always been my approach to it. Because you've had hundreds of thousands of individual people not connected, and we're going back way before the internet, way before social media, all telling eerily similar stories. Mm-hmm. The Occam's razor principle is justified. It's got to be a genuine thing. It's a genuine phenomenon that's happened to and is happening to people. I mean, you talked at the very beginning, just before we say goodbye, and I am going to give another big plug to the book. We talked at the beginning about you looking up into the sky, and you were imagining as a young boy. Would you like? I mean, you would probably, you'd give anything for a visitation, wouldn't you? Going forward, you'd love that.
Oh, I would, absolutely. I feel sort of funny talking about all of this, having never even seen a UFO. And it's been good, too, because it keeps me grounded. It keeps me skeptical in doing this research. But I can't imagine. I would feel so honored, and the amount I could learn from just even a short period of interdimensional, intertemporal contact. I would think that would be a life-changing moment.
Incredible stuff. Listen, I'm going to give a mention again to the book, Identified Flying Objects, a Multidisciplinary Scientific Approach to the UFO Phenomenon, written by Dr. Michael P. Masters. Michael is a professor of biological anthropology at Montana Tech in Butte, Montana. You did tell me that you recently secured tenure at the university. That's wonderful, by the way. Congratulations on that. And the very best of luck with the book. Is there anywhere else you'd like to direct in the final 30 seconds we have? Where else can the listeners find out more about yourself, Michael? I know there is a website for the book as well.
There is, yeah, and it's available on all major platforms, book selling platforms online as paperback, ebook, and audiobook. But there's links to all of those through the website, and that's probably the easiest way to find out more about it. Social media links, Twitter, Facebook, and so on. But it's just an abbreviated version of the book titled I'd Fly Obj, or IDFLY. obj.com. And I'd say that's a good starting point for finding out more about the project and just for connecting. And also, if they're interested in the book, there's links to all of the major book selling platforms.
Brilliant. I'll tweet that out now. Our listeners will be all over that. All the best in the world with the book, and I know you've got thousands of requests to do interviews. I know that, so thanks for giving us your time today. I really appreciate it. And when you've got more to tell us, Michael, you'll be welcome back here. We look forward to a sequel as well in the future. All the best, Michael. Thanks for coming on. Loved chatting with you today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Richie. I appreciate talking to you as well.
It was an honour. Thank you, sir. That was Dr. Michael P. Masters from Montana. Wonderful stuff, that. Huge interest in that today. I know there were a lot of tweets that were flying in, and I know there were points and questions that I didn't get to, but you'll forgive me because an enormous amount of tweets came in at the one time there. The link, the website it's idflyobj.com. So idflyobj.com. I'm going to tweet it anyway, and there are links there to where you can find that book. Very different, that, because you don't, as he pointed out earlier on, you don't get too many. In fact, I can't think of anybody with as senior an academic position as he has, writing about this particular subject from that point of view. So it really is absolutely fascinating. And I'm going to just tweet it out now. I've done it. I've just tweeted it there, okay? I'll put out a more substantive tweet a little bit later on. In this together, and Dean Smith enjoyed listening to that. So did David Stanford. Did you, David? David didn't. David says you don't get tenure for going against the grain. Conspiracy theorist till the end. I don't know how some people live, to be honest. How do you ever know that anything is real or genuine? But anyway, I'll bite my lip, I'll bite my tongue, and I won't say any more. Hi to Himanshi, who's listening to this not too far from Delhi, from New Delhi in India. How you doing, Himanshi? Nice to hear from you today. Let's have a look down again. A lot of tweets came in. Hi to Ricky Emmett. I have tweeted a link now. The tweet of the day goes to Trevor the Mule, who tweeted, I hope these people from the future aren't still arguing about Brexit. They might be. They might be. I could probably do an update. Can I do an update? Because they were due to. There was due to be a press conference at 6 p.m. UK time, but it doesn't look like there's been any agreement on the extension. You see, Theresa May is in Brussels now, begging, cap in hand, begging the tyrants of the European Union for an extension to Article 50. She wants to delay leaving the European Union until June 30th. They have said, at least yesterday, they have said, in the guise of Donald Tusk, the European Council President, they said, well, if you do get your deal passed next week, which she won't, but if you do, we'll give you an extension of sorts. That's what they said yesterday. She's there now. There is a little bit of development, is there? Officials are drafting a new text of the withdrawal agreement. And what's in that? Nobody seems to know. There might be some movement on this extension, but it might be a long evening ahead. It might be an hour or two or three before May and Tusk and Juncker and the rest of them emerge to describe or to tell us what's been going on. David got back to clarify. Thanks, David. No, I didn't mean that. The point of view the professor is exploring must be somewhat accepted, then therefore is a viable reality. All right, yeah. You didn't make that clear the first time. And as a long-time listener, and when you read tweets from long-time listeners, I know you are a narky, sarcastic old bastard, David, who doesn't believe anything or anybody, all right? So I was right to jump to conclusions there is the point I'm making. But thank you for clearing it up anyway. Not that it matters what I think. Stand by your point of view. Don't let me dissuade you from it. That's about it for the programme for this week. Anyway, thanks for listening to it and putting up with it. I'll be back with you again on Sunday morning for Sunday View. I want to give a big shout out, by the way, to Anna Brees, who was on earlier on. BBC, ITV journalist, coming out now talking about the propaganda of those organisations, particularly the BBC and Panorama. I think she's a very courageous woman. She's working with John Wedger. She's working with a lot of people. And I hope more follow. And I think more will follow. As things get increasingly more desperate, as the reality unfolds in front of people, as it inevitably will, because as the global elites continue to do what it is they are doing, as it gets worse, it becomes harder to conceal, in my opinion. Much harder. And it is being revealed to people who previously would have dismissed it as fantasy or lunatic conspiracy theory. More and more people can't ignore it. Within journalism, there are many decent people. I've said this 1,000 times. They're not all assholes in the independent, in the mainstream media. They are not. There are good people in there. In every walk of life, there are decent people. Compartmentalization is a real thing. And I think as more people start to see it for what it is, they will break away from it. They will be compelled to break away from it. And that's my opinion. More and more and more. And then what you'll have then is you will have an independent media with independent journalists, but with great skills and a great understanding of how to do the job, which the independent media is lacking in, for obvious reasons. The independent media is full to the brim of well-meaning, decent people, but with very little practical skills to do the job in a way that will attract more people to listen to their content or to watch it. I said it 1,000 times. I said it 1,000 times, right? I've said it 1,000 times. So I'm not going to say it again. You're going to wonder now, what did you say 1,000 times? I've said 1,000 times. There are people making programs on YouTube and they have tranches of information and they are very good and they are brilliant researchers and they have forgotten more than somebody like me will ever know. But they haven't a clue how to make a program. And it ends up that very few people see it. This is a tragedy. But as more qualified people come in and cast off their mainstream shackles, the independent media will going forward be a much more exciting place. And I look forward to that. Right, thanks for listening. Thanks for your comments. Have a magnificent weekend. It's a